National Film Studio, Belarus Film. Studio Letopis. On the order of the Ministry of Culture of the Republic of Belarus, presents Our people were to be destroyed, wiped off the face of the earth, and the survivors were to be reduced to the status of slaves. For this purpose, the Nazis created a terrible institution, death camps. Virtually all types of places of forced confinement, whether it is a ghetto, as a rule, everywhere, the conditions of confinement were aimed at destruction in particular. Therefore, death camp or extermination camp, it is rather a general name, which in principle unites all places of forced detention. Death camps. On April the 7th, the Prosecutor General's Office of the Republic of Belarus initiated a criminal case on the fact of genocide of the Belarusian people during the Great Patriotic War in the post-war period, committed on the territory of the BSSR by Nazi criminals, their accomplices, collaborators, and criminal formations. In the course of the investigation, it was confirmed that about 580 places of forced detention and death camps were functioning in the occupied territory of Belarus, which is 100 more than it was reflected in the official data before the initiation of the criminal case. But the number is not final. The investigation continues. There were 12 types: concentration camps, stalags, prisoner of war camps, child donor camps, ghettos, and labor camps. As the executioners retreated, they covered up the traces of their crimes, so new chilling facts are still being established, as well as the names of the dead and their perpetrators. When we talk about the Ost Master Plan, it is important to realize here that it includes all the basic elements of genocide, either it is extermination or forced displacement. These are the criteria that define the policy of genocide. The Ost Plan envisages eviction of 75% of the Belarusian population from occupied territory. The remaining 25% are to be Germanized. First of all, we must realize that this is not one document. It is a whole group of documents united by this one common title. The development of the Ost Master Plan began in 1939, and not only Nazi ideologists, but also practicing economists were involved in the development of this plan. The plan was based firstly on the race doctrine and secondly on the life space theory. So it was a plan of colonization, of extermination, and of resettlement. The Russians must die so that we may live. Can't you hear anything? And I hear it. I see the gun going off. Here's more and more. Minsk Ghetto, over 90,000 people killed. The Minsk Ghetto was the largest not only in Belarus, but also in the whole of Europe. The world knows about the Holocaust, the genocide of the Jews. Less is known about the genocide of the Belarusian people, but in the history of Belarus, they are connected. Fascists ruthlessly exterminated both Belarusians and Belarusian Jews. The first decisions were made by Wehrmacht officials to label Jews. To label means to mark them according to the symbols of Jewish culture. It's usually the Star of David. But as far as Minsk is concerned, there were a lot of peculiarities. In Minsk, Jews had lata. It was a yellow circle. How did murders take place? Not only through starvation, cold, disease, but through actions. Those were punitive actions that were carried out quite often in Minsk and in other Belarusian cities. During the liquidation of the Minsk ghetto, a woman with a small child hid in a cache. They had special caches there, cellars and niches. She ran in there and there were already about 20 Jews hiding. And the little baby started crying. Do you know what this woman did? She strangled her baby so as not to give the others away, because the baby's crying would give away everyone else. In the course of the actions that ended already on the 23rd of October 1943, we know that by that time all the ghettos of Belarus were destroyed, liquidated. It is hard to talk about it. It's not just a bullet that can kill a man. You can hang him, suffocate him with carbon monoxide, starve him to death, burn him in his native village or in the furnace of a crematorium. Gruesome ingenuity brings death.
And how can we call it?
There's this scary word: genocide. Koldicheva, more than 22,000 people exterminated. One of the concentration camps operated in Baranovich district near the village of Koldicheva. 22,000 people were tortured, shot, hanged, and gassed here. Examining the graves found in the camp, it was determined that the adults had died of gunshot wounds. The children had been suffocated. They were thrown into graves while still alive. There were up to 10,000 people permanently on the territory of the Koldicheva death camp. When another batch of people was brought to the territory of the camp, those were first of all intellectuals, family members, activists, party workers, and even priests. Some people, to intimidate the rest of the people, were taken away and publicly beaten and shot. There were also terrible examples. When there were 20 women who were taken away publicly and shot within the camp, and their one-year-old children, infants, carried off into the woods, killed and burned. Just in the last 3 days of the camp's existence, at least 2,000 people were killed by the Nazis and their collaborators. 2,000 people in just 3 days. And according to our data on the territory of the Koldicheva death camp, at least 22,000 people perished.
Conditions were certainly harsh. The building wasn't heated, cement floor, without straw. Then a little straw was sent up. Food, balanda, you cannot feed a child. It was not allowed for relatives to pass on milk or extra clothes. They were shot, not allowed through checkpoints. If a child cried, it was beaten. Whips were made of some kind of stiff wire.
For breakfast, one had to go dancing, jumping with a bowl and a can. And if you fell, bang, and that was it. The territory of the Koldicheva camp was heavily guarded. It was security service of the SS, which included Belarusian collaborators, traitors to the motherland. The distinctive feature of their uniforms were chevrons, patches of white, red, white color. The task was to fight against the Soviet power, against the Belarusian people themselves. The connection between the security service of the SS and the nationalists who formed these Belarusian battalions was very close. They were doing the same thing. According to the documents, there is a place of mass murder 11 kilometers away from Minsk. This is Blagovщина. It would depend directly on the camp, which would be opened in 1942 in Trostinets. And only in this place the inhabitants of the city were killed, as well as the Jews and the deportees. So the echelons would already be directly approaching this massacre site, and shootings would be taking place there. Well, the other thing that's important, of course, is that this place is the largest. So this is the place of tragedy for Belarus, because according to the latest data, the total number of the annihilated population is 546,000.
Grandfather, what is Trostinets?
A death camp, where the Nazis massacred people. Trostinets, 546,000 people killed. He followed the orders of his superiors precisely and willingly. These are the results of his hard work. Only now we've been able to determine the full extent of the Trostinets tragedy. Do you know why? Because in 1944, when the Red Army went on the offensive, the Nazis decided to hide their criminal traces, and they started to hide everything. The fascists, in order to cover their tracks, dug up the pits and proceeded to burn the bodies. Rails were laid on top, then the bodies, then the wood, and the whole thing was doused with tar. A fire was lit from below. Thus it made the effect of a strong draft for the bodies to burn, and the ashes crumbled down. When the State Emergency Commission investigated the case of Trostinets, they investigated pits full of ashes. A formula was obtained from calculations on the amount of human ashes in a cubic centimeter of soil. The ashes of Trostinets are forever in our hearts. Grigory Kantor and Kirill Tarasenko, former prisoners, came to visit the widow of a comrade. One day a group of Soviet citizens tried to escape from the camp, but they were all caught and brought back to the camp again. We thought they were going to be shot, but that wasn't the case. They were stripped, driven to the bathhouse, doused with water, driven out into the yard, and then killed with the help of shovels. That's when they built the crematorium, Several cars with old people, children and women came every morning. They were kicked out of the cars near the gate of the crematorium, and they were shot there, and then the bodies burned. Can you imagine that? People were brought here from all over Europe, from Poland, Germany, Austria. Blagovщина, memorial graves. Between 1941 and 1943, here in Blagovщина, the Nazis massacred inhabitants of Belarus, participants of anti-fascist underground struggle and partisan movement, Soviet prisoners of war, prisoners of the Minsk ghetto, and the Jewish population deported from Austria, Germany, the Czech Republic, Poland, and other European countries. The Trostenets complex consisted of three sites: Blagovщина, Sheshkovka, and Maly Trostenets. In Blagovщina, there were 33 grave pits. In Sheshkovka, people were burned in the crematorium furnace. And in Maly Trostenets, they were burned in barns. There is a belief that the souls of the innocently murdered turn into birds. How many unknown graves are there in Belarus, and how many destinies ruined by invaders? Just imagine flocks of white doves circling over our land like clouds. These are the souls of the dead, who just want to say to us, do not forget.
Grandfather, could this ever happen again?
Unfortunately, it can, as long as fascism exists on Earth. Many people don't know the past, so they can't understand what is right. They can't foresee the future, and the only cure is memory. The city of Gomel was liberated on November the 26th, 1943. On October the 14th, there was an order to forcibly evacuate the entire population. Special transfer camps were set up, into which the entire population was driven. After that, special punitive units were let loose. And those units were tasked to kill everyone. They wiped out 100 people in one day, the next day they wiped out 90. That is, if it was the private sector, people were driven into wooden houses and burned with flamethrowers. If they were stone buildings, they drove people into the basement and pelted them with grenades. And the liberated city of Gomel was basically one mass grave, because at every step there were hundreds of corpses. In one of the transit camps, which was on the outskirts of the city, they kicked out everyone who could walk on their own. There were about 40 people left. They were mostly women and children and old men. The Germans brought explosives into the camp, into the barracks, and blew them up. About 40 people were blown up, and according to the investigation of the emergency commission that was set up immediately after the war, there was one teenager of 16 years of age and one man among those victims. The rest were women and children. It was total annihilation. The first to answer is Richard, former commander of the Guard Division. On his orders, villages were burned together with the inhabitants. Soviet civilians were shot or taken to Germany as slaves. He set up a well-known death camp in a swamp near Zarichi. Now he is trying to avoid responsibility. He claims to have learned about the camp only when in prison. He lies. He chose this swampy place for it himself. German cameraman filmed it. Here is the footage. Zarichi, about 20,000 people killed. On January the 8th, 1944, the Kalinkovice-Mozyr operation began, liberating Kalinkovice and Mozyr on January the 14th. The offensive continued, and Parichi became liberated on January the 20th. Soviet advance was slowed by active German defense. The Germans were at a strategic disadvantage, and General Grossbach had a nominally great idea to deploy his troops to a more favorable position along the Tremble River, using civilians as a human shield. There was also a plan to use civilians as a bacteriological weapon, forcibly infecting local people with typhus. They thought that the Soviet army soldiers would not take strong precautions, which would stop the advance. Executing this order, the Germans selected groups of individuals and locations. One was here near Zarichi, another was near the village of Dirty, and one more was near the village of Podosinniki. The camps were essentially rectangular sites. Dirty was 600 by 900 meters, right in the swamp where the area was clear. There was barbed wire and observation towers with machine guns. A strip next to it was cleared to make sure they could see the whole area. The entire place was mined. All civilians were herded into transfer camps. Men and women of working age, as well as children over 13, were sent to hard labor in Germany. Old men, women with infants, children under 13 were transferred to the camps. Many people died because of hard labor or were shot. If someone wanted to drink water, they were killed right away. The camps existed for only 9 days. Most people arrived on March the 10th. By March the 19th, the camps were liberated. The conditions were unbearable. People stayed in the open, had no fire, and practically no food. The German command ordered that infected people from all nearby hospitals should be sent to the camps. Of course, many froze to death, especially children. The survivors said that mothers tried to pull children closer to each other to keep warm, 10 to 15 at a time. Many eyewitnesses said that in the morning, children used to crawl over their dead parents' bodies. Mothers would go mad and carry their dead children in their arms. There were explosions all the time because people tried to escape and were killed by the mines. A lot of people died from shrapnel wounds, and many were ruthlessly killed by machine gunners who were positioned in the towers. The liberation was complicated because there were mines all over the camp. They were everywhere, so it was necessary to make passages in the minefields to get all the people out. As there were tens of thousands of people there, the liberation operation took considerable time. Following Marshal Rokossovsky's instructions, some 25 field hospitals were established in the area. As a result, on March the 19th and 20th, more than 33,000 people were liberated from the camps, 16,000 children among them. There happened the so-called Zarich miracle. A child was born. His mother had died. The child was left lying by his mother's side. The following morning, they wanted to remove the body of the mother and discovered that the child was still alive. That was nothing but a miracle, and everything was done to keep the child alive. The soldiers who had liberated the camp were the first who took care of the baby. The baby survived, grew up, and lived his whole life in Belarus. He already died, regrettably, that resident of the city of Zlobin, Tatarinov by name. His birth certificate said he was born on March the 16th, 1944, and the place of birth was Azarichi, the death camp. The Germans, when retreating, used the tactics of scorched earth. They tried to completely and forcibly deport the entire population, sent them to Azarichi too, where they were people from Bryansk, Oryol, Smolensk regions. They were driven out of their homes by the Germans, who planned to use them as human shields. After the criminal investigation of genocide had begun in April 2021, several new campsites places of forced detention and mass killings were discovered. The investigation continues. New documents and facts are being found. No doubt the number is not final, and it will continue to grow. We are doing forensic tests on human bone remains. Why do that? First, we need to be completely objective. It's important to be sure the graves date back to the years of the Great Patriotic War. The method of killing was usually a shot in the head. People were pushed into the pit alive, and if someone tried to get out, they were shot from above. We repeatedly found skeletal fragments in the same position. People on their knees who were trying to climb out, a group of men lying face down and shot, another group in which the alive were on top of the dead and shot too. Why this position? It was a way of sealing the pit. In many cases they used tanks to tamp the pits or filled them with chemicals. Such was our tragic history. It is not a simulation, not an artistic image. Such was the reality. In 2022, we found another pit. Those were not the victims of shooting, as there are no bullet holes in the skulls that are fractured. We think that those people were the victims of gas chambers.
Grandfather, I don't really understand the word genocide. I don't understand why the mother and child are to blame and why their lives were taken away.
The answer is horrifying. Because they were Slavs or they were Jews. It is not easy for a man to understand the logic of genocide, of this bestial hatred. Stalag 342, over 33,000 people killed. The Nazi invaders established this concentration camp in July 1941. During the German occupation, there were 33,150 prisoners of war and civilians, including women, children, and the elderly who perished here. Not only prisoners of war were kept behind barbed wire, but civilians and children who were also used as donors of blood for Nazi soldiers.
Camps had their own gradation. These were gulags, transfer camps, where prisoners of war were drafted. Then they were sent to oflags or stalags. Stalags are camps for privates and sergeants, and oflags are for officers.
This camp was functioning from July 1941 to July 1944, until the day when the Soviet army liberated the Molodechny district. That camp occupied a large territory and comprised of wooden barracks without floor or heating. The barracks were absolutely not fit for living. They were so crowded that one had to walk over human bodies to get out at night. There were so many prisoners that they had to sleep in the open for days and days, despite cold weather in autumn or in winter. July the 3rd, the city of Minsk is completely liberated.
Minsk was liberated on the 3rd of July, Molodechny was liberated on the 5th of July, and immediately a special commission began working here. It was busy calculating material damage and uncovering special huge pits, measuring 10 by 15 meters, where the prisoners had been buried. Grandfather, the worst thing is when children are killed, just like me.
And now Semkova and Domacheva. We'll go there with you as well. How can you forget something like that? Domacheva orphanage, 54 children killed. The orphan children of Domacheva. Their photos are the only things left of them. They will be 7 years old, forever. Her name was Tosia. Now, she is Taisia Stepanovna Shakhmetova.
It's hard, very hard to remember the atrocities of the Nazis during the war. I was 10 years old at the time. This was in 1942. I was in an orphanage. One night, a truck pulled up, as well as armed fascists in the car, and they ordered all children to be loaded onto the car. They told them they would go to Brest. The teacher suggested that they change the children's clothes, wash them, but the Germans replied that they would be washed, fed, and clothed there. We all got in the car. We drove off a little bit and I jumped off the car. I hid on the territory of the orphanage. Then the car came back in the evening with bloody children's clothes. The second day, there was a pit with children lying in it. The children's legs, arms were sticking out of a hastily buried grave.
Krasny Bereg. More than 20,000 children taken to Germany for blood draws. Children's blood was drawn for wounded Wehrmacht soldiers. It was done in brutal, inhumane ways. They cut the heels and hung the babies, and their blood just dripped into basins. One of the practices of genocide of the Belarusian people was to take children away from parents. They planned to Germanize some of them, but the primary goal was to use children as blood donors for German soldiers. The Nazis tried to select blue-eyed children who had the most prevalent O-positive blood type and also positive rhesus factor. Having committed those gruesome criminal atrocities, the Nazis would burn the exsanguinated children's bodies. If we speak about Krasny Bereg, it was one of those concentration camps for children, all from nearby villages and neighborhoods. When the Soviet army began to advance in 1944, at least 2,000 children were transported to Germany, where they were used as blood donors for Nazi soldiers.
Dear good daddy, I'm writing you a letter from German captivity. When you, daddy, read this letter, I won't be alive. And here's my request to you, Father. Punish the German bloodsuckers. This is your dying daughter's will. When you come back, don't look for our mom. She was shot by the Germans when they asked about you. An officer beat her face with a whip. Mom didn't endure it and proudly said, "You won't intimidate me with a beating." I'm sure my husband will come back and throw you cruel invaders, out of here. Daddy, I turned 15 years old today. If you met me now, you wouldn't recognize your daughter. I've become very thin. My eyes have sunken in and my pigtails have been cut short. My hands are dry, like rakes. When I cough, my mouth bleeds. My lungs are shut. I don't want to be tortured any longer as a slave to the damned, cruel Germans who didn't let me leave. I pledge, Dad. Avenge Mom and me. Goodbye, good daddy. I'm off to die. Your daughter, Katya Susanina. My heart believes the letter will reach you.
Uruchi tract on the outskirts of Minsk, the graves of the victims of genocide. The invaders carried out mass executions here in 10 pits. The remains of about 58,000 prisoners of war and civilians executed by fascists were discovered here. It is a part of the ongoing large-scale criminal case of the genocide of the Belarusian people carried out by the General Prosecutor's Office of the Republic of Belarus. You can see that there are household items, keys, watches, manchettes, suitcase handles, pince-nez and shoes. How old was this baby here? 3 or 4 or 5 years old? We can guess the age of people who were killed and buried here, looking at their clothes and shoes. Before the criminal investigation began, no one knew where those people were buried and where the execution pits were located. At the 9th kilometer of the Minsk-Moscow highway, there stands an obelisk commemorating those who were killed in that place. The most important thing is that we have found their graves and that their souls will finally rest in peace. It is not the material losses or damage to infrastructure. It is the loss of life that is irreplaceable. Our people are that precious, priceless capital that was lost. The people who were killed, who died at the front or in the rear, who fought underground and didn't survive the war. Demographers estimate that, had it not been for the war, the population of Belarus today would reach 17 million people. At present, Western countries consider both the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany to be the perpetrators of the Second World War. There is a memorial coin issued in the USA dedicated to the victory in the Second World War. It displays 3 flags of the victorious countries, the USA, Great Britain, and France. The flag of the USSR, one of the victorious countries, is not there. We are no longer victors for them, and they teach such history to their children. Today, of course, there is hybrid warfare. It concerns historical memory. It is a war for the minds. In any scientific dispute, a document from archives is a much stronger argument. It is the most irrefutable way to prove the truth and discover what has long been unknown, what our people didn't even know. There are things that even we, archivists and professional historians, didn't sometimes know because a huge amount of data is yet to be studied. These facts are what the younger generation should be the first to learn about. This generation has met no veterans, grandparents, who can tell them about those terrible times. But they should know the truth about the worst war in human history. They should know the truth about the tragedy of the Belarusian people. In fact, we could have disappeared as a nation, as a people. This memory should be carried by our young.
Grandpa, time will pass, and what will stay?
Just memory. Our memory.